Welcome back to Chai Chat, an extremely important question we have raised. But before we come to the solution, and it can be at all get a handle of this entire issue of terrorism in the West and the globe, why has radical Islam been able to almost take over the moderate Islam? Why in the world Islam, which is supposed to be a peaceful religion, is now almost tarnished? Asma.
Well, let's not say about religions. I mean, every religion has its good points and its not so good points. But the fact remains that there has been a bashing of liberals within the Muslim world to the extent that they've almost become an extinct creature there because of precisely the reasons we talked about here, dictatorships and so on and so forth. But I think we need to pick up from what Zahid said is that when you're talking about solutions, we should not have one size fit all.
Why has that sector not come forward and brought in the real face of Islam, which has been interpreted wrongly, let's say?
It's not like this face has not come. The real issue that there are various kinds. Radicalization takes in various forms. There are state-induced radicalization. There is also actually because of the oppression. Like for example, actually we saw in the countries, it is state-induced radicalization because to serve a certain objective.
Absolutely.
And similarly, actually Saudi Islam, that's also a self-induced.
Self-sustaining, basically.
Because of certain purpose.
Yes.
Because that has become a policy of the state. Radicalization is directly linked to the oppression in Middle East.
And I think that's right. There's no simple prognosis to defeat terrorism. But if we can move towards political systems and forms of governance which give people voice, respect and hope, then the space for militancy of any form is greatly diminished. And that's the big problem, of course, is in terms of what the West has tried to do in Iraq, in Syria and in Libya, it has failed to provide that space.
I think that the Wahhabi school has dominated the debate, and it hasn't been seriously challenged by the moderate, the Sufi, the moderate Muslims, the people we would call as moderate Islam, which was prevalent in most Muslim societies. It was really quite a narrow, marginal, well, they were perhaps not marginalized, but they were quite a relatively minor section of Islam that was practicing this Wahhabi or advocate this Wahhabi philosophy, but they were, and I don't think they've been challenged. There is a propaganda war. It's a war for hearts and minds, and I think those those Muslims, there is this feeling that are they really moderate, these Muslims who don't appear to subscribe?
It's not that there is not a resistance in our country. We have paid heavily for the wrongs of our military leadership in the past that was obviously supported by everybody in the West.
The problem is, for example, I'm just giving an example of Pakistan. It's not that radical Islam is acceptable to majority of the population. What they have managed to do, radicals, to establish a state of fear, and that basically this ruling comes from the state of fear, and I think probably it's also something to do with the state weakness. When a state fails to establish rule of law, then actually majority of the population becomes helpless. So it does not mean that radical Islam is basically has captured the imagination of the people. That's not true.
That's not true.
I would like to put in a word for the word radical. Arguably, the people who are most radical are the people who we've been talking about, who have resisted the dogma, the easy, simple solutions, people who don't ask questions. What we need is for people to ask questions, to ask deep questions. Radicalization is a word that's acquired a meaning that it means that you're going to set off bombs and kill people. That's not the true meaning of the word radical, which is a fundamental and important part of education and of society.
Where do they get these arms from? You have reported,
Well, ISIS, I haven't reported in Iraq, but I think what we know is that they overran the government, barracks and armories, and so of course they ended up with a lot of American weaponry that had been given to the Iraqi army. In Libya, you know, Gaddafi was well known for having many more times arms than his army actually needed, so the place was awash with arms, and so now that's spread into smuggling across the whole region. Afghanistan has always had a lot of arms, but we saw during the war, as the insurgency grew against the Americans, we saw new, fresh Chinese Kalashnikovs coming in, and we presume that came through Pakistan and given to the Taliban. So when you have proxy armies, there are governments who get the weapons and fund them.
Okay, I'll just wind up with, again, one sentence or whatever you can say on how and can we get a handle on this?
I tend to be an optimist, and I do think that there is a rhythm of things, and I suspect that Islamic militancy has hit and is starting to decline. But what is needed most of all is a consensus among the key governments, which would include those which have got their own interests, which would include Iran, it would include China, and it would include Russia, as well as Western Europe and North America.
Brilliant, thank you.
No, I tend to agree. I think it is on the decline. And regardless of a new Daesh coming in or other groups coming in, there is a division also amongst them. But it will not be eliminated in a matter of few months or years. It will take half a decade at least for it to disappear to a large extent.
John, quickly.
Well, I think that the West might think about making gestures to the Muslim world. The solution to the long-term 70-year problem of Palestinian suffering.
Yes.
That would help a good deal if America stopped its very partisan approach to that whole issue.
Basically, who has been the major victim of this radicalization? The Muslims. It's all Muslims who have been killed, whether it's Iraq, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and other countries. So now actually it's much greater responsibility of the Muslims themselves to fight that radicalization and to actually accept, but the same side, the West has to take responsibility.
I would say it's not peaking, I don't think. I think it's going to go, I think we've got this for another 10, 15 years. Certainly in North Africa it's coming up. It's going to get worse. I would perhaps, I think you have to solve the wars first. You have to solve Syria, because if you solve Syria, that I think would at least calm some things down. Of course, the longer standing issues too. I would quote an imam who I interviewed in North Africa, and I said, how do we resolve this crisis, this worldwide now problem Islamic? He said only when Saudi Arabia will accept churches and synagogues on its land. In other words, only when the leading Islamic nation, which houses the holy sites of Mecca and Medina, accepts multicultural, multi-religious plurality.
I'm just going to go back to a very naive proposition. I think it's in all our interests to teach children and to think for ourselves This is in the interests of people brought up in Islamic traditions or people brought up in Western traditions. It's not inculcating some sort of set of values that belongs to Britain or doesn't belong to Britain. It is teaching people to think for themselves. It's in no one's interest to be a suicide bomber.
Thank you very much, everybody. That was really, really fantastic. Not that we are planning to resolve the world here, but we do try. Thank you very much for joining us on Chai Chat. It has been very, very interesting discussing this with such a fantastic panel. How did you like the show? Please Twitter me at Lavina Tandon, or you can email me at chaichat@archtak.com. We'll be back with another sizzling issue next week. Thank you very much. Take care and God bless.